Hi everyone, Clovis here from KinematicLAB. In this video tutorial I'm going to show you how to use OverMorpher WorldSpace. So in my example I have a little ball bouncing on the ground, okay? And I like this animation, but I would like to enhance it with squash and stretch deformations. So what I'm going to do is add the OverMorpher WorldSpace modifier here. And what it does, it enables you to sculpt a specific pose in animation, okay? To correct it. And this pose is going to be blended with your animation. So you can correct pretty much everything in terms of mesh deformations, squash and stretch, smear frames, muscle deformations, bulgings, correct some cloth simulations as well, correct a point cache, correct an alembic file, all that is mesh animation and deformations. So I'm going to create a first pose right here, stretch before it hits the ground, and for that you go to the poses parameter rollout, choose a pose name. So by default it's pose 1, but you can choose whatever you want. Let's call it stretch 01, and you press the sculpt button. It isolates the ball and you can start to sculpt it with some brushes you have here, which are the brushes from the ribbon tool. So by default it starts with the move brush here. So let's try with this one. Okay, you have the rotate brush as well, the scale, the push brush, the pinch, and the relax. So you can use the usual shortcuts, which are Control and drag and drop, left mouse drag and drop, Shift, left mouse drag and drop. This is working for move, rotate and scale, and the push, pinch and relax are the old style sculpting brushes. So it works with a combination of Shift and Control plus left click and drag, okay, and Shift and Alt key plus left click and drag. Right. So I sculpt my pose, and once it's okay, you can exit the sculpt mode, and this pose is saved in the OverMorpher list here. And also you see that it has 3 keyframes that are created here. So obviously you can move these keyframes, okay? If the pose doesn't look like you want, you can update it by clicking the update button. And it updates the pose. Okay. On this frame I want to create a squash deformation. So I create a new pose, I call it squash, and enter the sculpt mode. Again, it isolates the ball, and I can start to sculpt my pose. Let's say something like that, and I exit I adjust my keyframes. You can go back to the stretch and adjust it again so it blends in a better way. So now let's see some options for the keyframes. You see that you have 3 keyframes, one at the value 0, one at the value 100, and the third one at a 0 again. By default, when these keyframes are created, they are separated from 5 frames. Okay, I moved them, but by default it's 5 frames before and 5 frames after. You can change this parameter and change it to the value you prefer. That's gonna stay in the plugin. Something else you can see is that when you change the selection of the pose, okay, it moves the slider, the time slider at the right frame. Okay, that is an option here that you can disable if you want, called auto timeline pose. Okay, if I remove it, you see that it doesn't move the timeline. Okay, you also have a filter current pose keys, which is very useful when you start to have a lot of poses saved here and a lot of keyframes. So it filters only the keys that are related to the specific pose that you're in. Okay, again, you can disable this feature and it's gonna show all the keys right here, but I find it very useful. And you also have a third option, which is auto select middle key, which selects automatically the middle key here. Something else, if you open the curve editor, okay, you see that when you select a pose in the list, it automatically filters it in the curve editor as well. So you don't have to go in the list here, change your filters. It's already selected in here, so it's isolated. And you can move the curves as well. What is good also is that you can go above 100 to create much more higher deformation that you sculpted. Okay, so this is quite useful sometimes. Let's continue our sculpt. So I'm gonna make another stretch here. So that's gonna be stretch 02. Okay, sculpt, and I start to sculpt. So I'm using the brushes here by default, but if you want to use the editable poly method, you still can do that. So you can do a right click to exit the brush and use the modeling tools, you know. But in this case I'm going to use the brush because it's much more easy for that specific pose. So that's not exactly what I want, so I will update it. Like that. Switch, and it goes back. So it makes it looks much more cartoony and fluid, like a little flubber. And you can go on and on and on. Let's do another one here. And another squash right here. And so on. But you can also go really crazy on your poses, of course. That's really up to you. I'm not really good at that, but for example, you could make a pretty crazy swirl. It doesn't really make sense, but you can do what you want. Some other options here is that you can disable a pose, okay, or enable it. You can delete a pose as well. There is an option saying that the brush, the first brush when you sculpt is the move brush, so you can disable this, and when you enter in sculpt mode or update, there is no brush started already. Okay. Something else is that you can export your mesh at a specific state, like if you wanted to sculpt it. Okay, so let's say here I want to stretch it. I click on export OBJ, and it says, okay, my pose already exists. There is already a name like that, or a pose already saved at this frame, so be careful and choose another name. Okay, so export OBJ, and it's going to open this window where we can choose a folder. So press OK. And what it did is that it exported a file. If I open here, you see that there is here a stretch 04, which is the name of my pose, OBJ saved on my desktop. So you can open it in ZBrush or Mudbox, start to sculpt it, re-export it into Max, and then once it's imported, let's say I import it, so it's here, okay, and let's say I corrected it in ZBrush, so I will make a little correction here. I can pick an external mesh imported with the pick mesh here, and it's like if I corrected it inside Max. I can delete it. Okay, and it's here. You can also extract a specific pose, so by pressing the extract button, so it extracts the mesh. It's here if you want to do something with it, or save it for later, or even snapshot some of the poses to give it to a modeler or someone who will sculpt them and correct them for you. Then you import it back in your animation, so you can export all those poses. So you see that it fits perfectly on the saved mesh. That's it. Cheers.